ladies and gentlemen, is Ukrainian show on POT TV. My name is Sasha Star, and my guest today is renowned professor and doctor Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Whoop. Oh, there I am. Okay. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
First of all, let me announce the great news. I just finished watching the soccer,
Yep.
the European Soccer Championship, and Ukraine beat Slovakia 2-1. After losing first half 1-0, they scored two goals and two fantastic goals in the net of Slovakia. And now they have one more match. Unfortunately, it's with Belgium, which is treated as one of the strongest teams. However, Belgium lost to Slovakia in first match. So everything is possible. It's very unpredictable this time. And if Ukraine even will make just a draw, it's enough for Ukraine to qualify. So
Excellent.
you'll see so far so much excitement. I was surprised how many Ukrainians in Germany were present on the field and watching the match live, and with all Ukrainian flags and
But,
screaming. And, it was fantastic
but
show.
Sasha, could you possibly imagine in the next World Cup qualifying match if it turned out that Ukraine and Russia were in the same group, and a match between Ukraine and Russia? That would be another. That would be another, like a prelude to World War III.
Well, interestingly enough, before the final stage of the soccer championship, same as Europe and World Championship, the qualifying matches they're being played throughout 2 years' time, sometimes longer. And Russia was allowed to play the qualifying matches. And only after they made it to playoffs, they still had to play somebody else. And I think there was a group of three teams: Russia, some other team, and Ukraine.
Oh my!
And at that point, Russia was disqualified.
Ooh.
Period.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, not allowed to play another team while you're invading them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a good policy. You remember there is a story about famous soccer match in during Second World War after Germans occupied Kiev, and one of the best teams in Soviet Union was Dynamo Kiev, and Germans who love soccer just as well. They organized match against the selected Gestapo team and Kiev Dynamo. And so Dynamo was leading. And after first half, Germans said, well, enough is enough. Now we are going to bring the guns on the field. And if you are going to play as well as you played in the first half, we are going to use guns against it. And they killed about 5 or 6 players. But Ukraine won anyway that match. So that was a very tragic. There was a movie was done about this match, and I've read a little bit about that. Now, coming back to situation, what's happening right now, I've read very interesting article. I think it's on Foreign Affairs about what makes this war different from all others is the use of drones. And Ukraine is not doing its own drones, which are very effective. There are a lot of countries, and one of them in the article they were talking about one drone factory in Lithuania. And they are supplying a lot of drones to Ukraine, and they're quite sophisticated. They're not like cheap drones that you put, for 50.
It's like they aren't glorified buzz bombs like World War II.
Yeah, but what they do, they have great interface. So the people who operate them, they are in a bunker. They are very well protected against the enemy's fire. But they see everything. What the drone can see, they see it as well.
It's called first-person view.
First-person view, you are exactly right. And they are extremely effective. They can even fly through the window of a building in a certain room, whatever you have selected.
Basically, you can see the face of your target right up until the moment it explodes right on the person.
It's too bad that you cannot say hello, how are you,
Hello and goodbye at the same time.
hello and goodbye. And so it's a very interesting article. I recommend everybody to read it. And it's just the beginning, because these drones are getting more and more into Ukrainian hands, and they are getting more and more sophisticated. And first few, absolutely, you're right. It's
And
really,
it is a lesson that I hope the U.S. military takes to heart and incorporates quite vigorously, because it will be a very useful augmentation and quite possibly shall we say, an economical substitute for the U.S. military, is especially as the United States has conflicting interests and competition for its resources in the coming years. So drones may well be a very effective portion of U.S. military power as well.
So imagine that the drones would be available to U.S. during either Iraq or Afghanistan affairs or so on. That would be a very, very different situation. And maybe the wars would end much quicker. And I'm wondering actually if Israel is using drones against.
Don't put it past them. Don't put it past them. They're very clever and very industrious, and they are taking very careful stock of the potential of these weapons. And they no doubt have their own plans and contingencies for integrating them into their force structure.
And obviously, if this article appeared in Foreign Affairs, it seems to me that all countries, all militaries, studying very carefully the war in Ukraine against Russia.
Oh, yes.
There are a lot of innovations, and Ukrainians prove to be very resilient and very indigenous.
So, Sasha, on a somewhat humorous side note, in the United States, there is sort of a small cottage industry. They're commercial war game companies.
Mm-hmm.
These are companies that produce war games for purchase by the public on practically every war and every conflict in history. And they also, some companies like Strategy and Tactics Simulations Publications, they have done war games on hypothetical conflicts which never occurred or which could occur. So I can bet you almost with metaphysical certitude that there are a number of commercial private war game companies in the United States, all of whom are very carefully observing the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and that they are probably going to, if not at the conclusion, maybe even shortly before the conclusion, I would expect to see a commercial war game or two, maybe several, being offered on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which would even include rules which incorporate hypothetical events which, what if this occurred instead of this? Then you could be able to make predictions or projections on your own using these war games.
Actually, it would be nice if they would already start selling these games, and part of the proceeds would go to Ukrainian defense.
Now that would be an interesting innovation. It would be quite possible. But I will tell you that there are collections of military historians and war gamers who work for these various war game companies, who are no doubt they have their people assigned to watch this conflict and study it and begin to model it, to say, okay, what rule systems do you need to create in order to adequately recreate the situation in Russia and Ukraine, and therefore be able to make what-if projections based upon different strategies that might be adopted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very interesting development. Now, since our show is Ukraine, Russia, China, I would like to say a few words about Russia, because this is the major problem for Ukraine, that its neighbor, imperialistic Russia, is inflicting so much damages and so much horror on their own people, of course, first of all, and Ukrainians, unfortunately. Now, interestingly enough, it's been noted that Mr. Putin supposedly has some doubles, 2, 3, maybe even more. Whether it's true or not, it's irrelevant. What Putin is, he's a great manipulator, and he's great at make up his appearances so they are like different, two or three different persons. For example, in one of the meetings recently, about a week ago, inside of Russia, so it's always catered to the audience where he's performing. So on that conference, he was talking for an hour about the great achievement of Russian economy, of Russian manufacturing and farms and produce, and how Russia is doing great, and next year will be doing even much better. And it was all propaganda, which has absolutely no validation of any kind, but it doesn't need validation.
It starts to remind you of the Khrushchev era.
Yes, Khrushchev, yeah, but remember he was crazy about so-called kukuruza. If you remember, it's something what when he visited America in, I think, 56, his first trip to America, no, in 58 maybe, before the Cuban crisis, of course.
Right.
So when he visited America, and he saw how great America is and how people live, and it's 200 years ahead of.
I recall reading also that Khrushchev was very upset during his visit because he was not allowed to visit Disneyland in California.
Yeah. Yes, he was not allowed, but
he wanted to meet Mickey Mouse and all this other stuff.
He wanted to figure out what's the secret why America is so far ahead from Soviet Union and how to shrink this difference. And he visited farms. And what he figured that America is doing so well because of their superior farms and great technique, and especially this. He came with the slogan, "We need kukuruza. We need as much kukuruza as possible." And
I don't quite get the translation of that one. What would be kukuruza? How would you translate that in English?
I forgot that word. It's very simple. It's everybody eats it, and it's seeds.
Okay.
How you call it? That you can buy in any supermarket. And
yeah.
What's the name of it? Okay, it's with Tilka. Yeah. So that, and he decided that this is a secret why America is so much ahead, and he ordered everywhere in Soviet Union. Started.
Boris Yankelevich.
Oh, this guy's really getting me. So he said that everywhere in Soviet Union we need this culture. Now, of course, he was not sophisticated enough to understand that there are some certain differences in climate, and whatever can grow really well in the United States may not grow well in Siberia. It's
right.
There are some differences. He was not aware of it.
I think that was the mistake he made when Khrushchev initiated the so-called Virgin Lands project, where he opened up a lot of.
That's true, yeah.
And with the idea that opening up these new areas of farmland would greatly produce food production, not understanding, as farmers did, that there are certain requirements that you need in order to be able to use this virgin farmland effectively. Otherwise, you just get a lot of crop failures.
And you see, the Putin now, what he's saying, it's during the Soviet time, they had to buy grains from U.S., Canada, even Argentina sometimes. Now he's saying that the situation is drastically different. Today, Russia is feeding all the world. If it wouldn't be for Russia, if you would decide to put a grain embargo, everybody will die.
Right. That man desperately needs to avoid laxatives. Otherwise, he is liable to do a Wicked Witch of the West imitation and disappear from the face of the earth without leaving so much as a brown stain on the ground to mark his passing.
And
Am I saying that he's full of certain something? Yes, I say I think he is.
so every there are applause and people are so happy. And okay, a couple of days later, there is another Putin speech. However, it's a different, very different audience. Now he is talking about. He was there with his friend. I think you remember who he is, Karaganov,
Oh no, not Professor Doomsday again.
Professor Doomsday. So this,
That sounds like it sounds like a character from a bad Marvel comic book.
yeah. So they're discussing how great Russia is and how it will destroy all its enemies and so on. And Ukraine, they just because they still feel some affection for Ukrainians. This is why they decided to keep this war going. Otherwise, they could completely destroy Ukraine very quickly. But
Well, they love mounting Ukrainian heads on their tanks.
that's true. Yeah, that's what they're doing. And so Karaganov says, "Well, okay, forget about Ukraine. It's a done deal. What's next target? Should we drop a bomb on maybe London or maybe Paris? Where should we start? I mean, they never discuss this, but it's about time to think about it." And Putin's saying, "Well, I would give them some time to smarten up." Because look, some people make mistakes. You know, you cannot kill millions of people just because some leaders made a mistake. So we should give them some time, maybe do some a little bit explanation and show them which part of London will suffer first and then second and so on. So we have to work with them. There are people like you and me. They're different people, but we will help them to understand what's waiting for them. So completely the same Putin, completely different speech, different theme. It's very different. So now comes third Putin. His trip to North Korea. So now he's signing the treaty with North Korea. And the cleverness of this is that he visited China a few days before his trip to North Korea. So obviously, China is well aware of what was going on, and China is playing very clever strategy, saying that no, we are not going to join this whatever North Korea, Russia. We are not interested in that because we are the world power. We are playing a game with countries like United States, Europe, or so on. You know, are we going to go from here to there to do something with destitute North Korea? But don't forget that in reality, China controls North Korea like nobody else, not even Russia, but nobody else. For Russia, which China is using like a little boy who will come to adults and say, okay, give me the $10. And if somebody will refuse, then comes 5, 6 very well trained people and extract the same $20, maybe much more. So China wants to keep this alliance and maybe secretly even supporting it because this is a kind of a counter fact to even to NATO. For example, to NATO is very strong as alliance because everybody supports each other. So Putin creates now with North Korea same type of alliance, not trying to compare it to NATO, don't get me wrong. But the idea is that when you negotiate something with Russia, you now have to negotiate as well with North Korea because if you negotiate with Russia but you don't negotiate with North Korea can unleash. Now, I think United States and the West have a limited time left until Russia indeed, if and when, supply all this missile technology to North Korea and others, the cosmos technology and so on. So it's not going to happen very quickly. It will take at least a year, maybe longer. But U.S. needs to respond to that. I don't think that U.S. can take an approach that it's not going to happen or it's a fantasy world, so on. There could be some chances that it will indeed happen. No, not in a year time, but maybe in 2 years, maybe in 5 years time, or so on. Well, the later is the better.
That would require, Sasha, that sort of thing on the part of the United States would require a significant, if not drastic, reorientation of it, not only its national security policy, but of its strategic doctrine as well.
Yeah.
I have alluded to the kinds of changes that would be needed
Mhm.
in previous programs, and I will not repeat them again here but we have discussed them.
Yeah.
But it's simply continuing on with the ad hoc responses, which is what essentially the United States is doing. It is responding to the situation as it is developing. It does not apparently have any kind of coherent strategic framework or strategy that governs its uses of military power and when and where it will use them. So it is a very ad hoc response. So this has problems. On the one hand, you're not governed by a particular doctrine. On the other hand, you don't really have a means of determining when you have achieved your goals. So when you're left with that situation, as far as military spending goes, you end up with the approach of more of everything is better, which is not really a solution.
Yeah, and it's estimated that even with this budget, the Pentagon can wage
858 billion.
yeah, and they can conduct only two major wars at the same time, but not three. And how much you have to spend money to fight three wars, and what's happening if there were a fourth one?
The thing is, that is very reminiscent of back during the 1960s, during the Cold War. McNamara had come up with a 2.5 war strategy. Basically, that the United States ought to be able to conduct a major war against the Soviet Union, the People's Republic of China, and a third, the half war conflict, to some minor conflict elsewhere, which at that time, what the implication was Vietnam. So now that's the 2.5 war strategy. Then during the interestingly enough, later in the Nixon administration, the Pentagon came out with the 1.5 war strategy. That gets interesting. And I pointed out to my students, okay, who dropped out? Who dropped out of the equation and why? Well, as it turns out, remember Nixon's visit to China. Essentially, China dropped out of the 2.5 war equation because it was only necessary for the United States, based upon Nixon's visit to China and playing the China card, so to speak, and trying to play off China against the Soviet Union, that it was only necessary for the United States military to be able to wage 1.5 wars, the implication being the Soviet Union being one and a minor conflict being the other. And so, and ever since then, the force structure requirement for the United States has varied between 2 wars, 2.5 wars, so forth. There have been different statements of it, both during the Cold War and thereafter. But now we do not have a coherent strategic framework within which to prioritize our military spending and how we will use military power under given situations. So that is something which the next administration, once the November election has taken place, it doesn't matter who is in power. The strategic necessity of having a coherent strategic framework to deal with that situation is still going to exist, regardless of which political party is in power. The strategic necessity is not going to go away. So,
Yeah,
in that sense, the election itself is irrelevant.
Yeah, although I must admit that Russia, Putin, they are dreaming of Trump winning the election, and that would solve.
That's a case of you better watch out what you wish for. You may get
it. Well, get it.
and Trump will give it to them really hard. So
yeah,
that's not necessarily what they would want.
In my opinion, that what Biden lacks compared to Trump is resolve, or at least great posturing in the international politics, international affairs, and so on. I don't think that Trump has deep understanding of international politics or so on, but his posturing itself may be quite an asset.
And you must not discount the fact that former President Trump may have learned a great deal from the experience of his first term, and there are accounts of Project 2025 by the Heritage Foundation,
Yeah,
where they are talking about recruiting a great school of political appointees, not indoctrination, but educating them and vetting them so that they will all be prepared to serve in a putative conservative Republican administration from day one, being able to they would understand what a newly elected President Trump's goals would be, and they would be able to carry them out very effectively and efficiently and not waste any time doing so. So that could be a very, very positive development in that the United States would in fact have a coherent strategic policy framework within which to operate. And that would be a great relief to our allies because they would now have greater predictability, reliability. They would no longer have this ad hoc response to every developing crisis or situation. So there are some positive aspects which should not be ignored. And the conventional wisdom that the Russians are betting on Trump being victorious in November, well, that's not necessarily a good thing for Russia at all, because Russia was not. Keep in mind that Russia did not invade Ukraine during the Trump administration, the first Trump administration. So,
yeah, they started in 14 when it was still Obama administration. Yeah. And I'm wondering, though, what's in your opinion happened that Trump was very careful in his approach to North Korea, and he established some kind of personal relationship with its leader, Kim Jong-un. And then it stopped at some point without explanation. What in your opinion happened?
No, that one is a really difficult. It's a relationship which it started, and there was some positive aspects.
There was love at first sight. Remember,
right? So to speak, and there is nothing to say that relationship might not pick up where it left off should President Trump be reelected in November. There's nothing to say that positive things would not happen as a result of that. And especially, let's say, for example, that in a new administration, let us say that the Trump administration decides to, in coordination with its NATO allies, to create what I've been recommending in the Worldwide Strategic Defense Matrix that I describe in the Russian View of U.S. Strategy, the acronym WISDOM, Worldwide Strategic Defense Matrix. That we would in essence be replacing mutually assured destruction, MAD, with Worldwide Strategic Defense Matrix, WISDOM, both symbolic and an effective statement, because interestingly enough, the Worldwide Strategic Defense Matrix would be very special in one specific regard. It does not kill anything.
Excellent. That's fantastic. Yeah. Oh my God. I know what is kukuruza. It's corn. Corn. It's corn. Yeah.
Corn. Okay. Well, yes. That's a fascinating development right there, because right now in the current situation, Sasha, the United States uses, and this is something we really should stop doing, just sheer common sense. We should stop using 40% of our corn crop to make ethanol, which we put into our gas tanks. Using food for fuel was the rationale that was used during the George W. Bush administration was that this was a way to lessen our dependence upon foreign oil. It's to sort of make the oil go farther. Well, now that the United States oil production, thanks to fracking and other oil technologies, we have this incredible oil production capacity. We do not need to put ethanol made from corn into our gas tanks. So if the president, for example, say a newly elected President Trump were to say, okay, stop using by executive order, stop using corn to make ethanol. That frees up 40% of our corn crop. Guess what you can use that for? Food, cornmeal, and various other things that you can. And that would have, in turn, would have a very positive effect on food prices, because when you produce a greater supply of food all suddenly, and oh, by the way, you could increase that even more by simply issuing an executive order forbidding the use of high fructose corn syrup. That is a chemical. It's a chemical flavor enhancer. It has no nutritional value. It has some very dubious effects on health, and we use 7% of our corn crop, 7%, to produce high fructose corn syrup. You forbid that. Now suddenly you do those two things. Now you have freed up 47% of the U.S. corn crop that could all theoretically would be used to produce non-GMO related cornmeal, food products. You release that amount of food, nearly doubling the amount of corn that goes into that could be used for exports. And the effect would be to have a deflationary effect on the price of food, because you're greatly increasing the supply. So that is an example of things which a new administration, or even the current administration, if it decided to become more enlightened in its approach. But in any case, there are things that can be done, things which are currently very counterproductive, which if the United States simply stopped doing them and allowed the market to determine what needs to be produced, then you have a very positive development on several fronts. And oh, by the way, if you're ending of the Ukraine war, enabling Ukraine to become fully productive, being able to increase its food exports, that has a further deflationary effect on the price of food, and it has a very positive effect. So there are very good reasons, not just for the survival of Ukraine, but for the better prosperity of Western Europe, and by extension, the world. And I still maintain that there are prospects and opportunities for Ukraine to, in effect, take its destiny into its own hands by defeating Russia in Crimea, cutting off Crimea from reinforcement and resupply. And in doing so, that reverses the illegal annexation of 2014, and it forces Russia to recognize that it has been operationally defeated. And an increasing number of Western analysts are coming to the same conclusion, that Crimea, the possession of Crimea, is the true center of gravity of this entire war.
Yeah, and what we discussed about Putin, remember his latest ultimatum against the Ukraine. So I think West now fully realize that the only way to get rid of any threats to Ukraine is to actually defeat him on the battlefield. There is no other solution. There is no negotiations. There's absolutely nothing. If he could go as far as to suggest that not only Ukraine will leave all the territories acquired by Russians, but also additional territories which they haven't even acquired. Well, with that, I would like to thank you, Jonathan, for today's program very much, and have a great weekend.
You do the same.
See you soon on Tuesday, same place, same time. Glory to Ukraine. Bye-bye, everybody.